Hello, everyone. If you don't know me yet, I'm Ayati Dashkar. I'm an 8th grade student. I'm the Global Youth Lead for the World Women Foundation and the Global Youth Ambassador for the Swiss UNESCO Foundation Heidesium. And I'm here to introduce the next panel, which is an absolutely amazing panel, which is sponsored by IMD, Women, AI, and the Innovation Paradox, and why closing the gender gap is not optional. It's pretty relevant to our theme here, the spirit of dialogue and the equality moonshot. We have Ms. Sarah Toms, who is the Chief Innovation Officer and Executive Committee member of IMD. Ms. Lisa Monaco, who's the President of Global Affairs at Microsoft. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I sent the updated list this morning, so we'll introduce ourselves.
Sorry so much.
Amazing. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We will be speaking with our incredible experts. I have here on stage with me Ginny Badenas, who is the GM for Tech and Society at Microsoft. ZEHRA CHATOO, who is the founder for Code for Good Now, and also a non-executive director on the UN for Women, and is former Meta. And last but not least, we have HILDA LISWANI, who is the founder and CEO of WeBloom. Just as a basis of this conversation, so we know AI is a massive transformation. I don't need to say it. 1.6 trillion already invested in AI since 2013. We're looking at another 5 trillion between now and 2030. Yet only half of the population is represented. You know, the men are represented, and women are grossly underrepresented in both the development of AI and also in its use. Women make up less than a quarter of AI professionals and only 14% of AI executives. And in a massive study done by Stanford last year and Harvard, we saw, and this is over 143,000 women, they are 20 to 22% less likely to adopt AI. And I know the adoption gap is closing, but you know, there's certainly a jagged edge there. So these are the gaps we're going to explore, the implications today with our incredible panelists, and making sure that you know we really start to open up the conversation with respect to this. So I'm going to start with thinking about reframing the ethical hesitancy as leadership, and beginning here with ZEHRA with the first question. Women are asking harder questions about AI, about labor exploitation, about whose data trains these models, and also about the environmental costs. If we valued these questions as leadership contributions, how would the AI industry look differently today?
Wow. So a couple of things. I think the first thing is, you know, I believe AI can be an engine of tremendous opportunity, but it needs to be pointed in that direction. And the key thing really with AI is, for me, it's ultimately, you know, it's a brilliant prediction machine based on the patterns it sees, but it mirrors. It's a mirror. It mirrors, you know, how the data it sees and how we're behaving. And the question is, you know, what is it mirroring at this point in time? And how can we shift that? By asking these questions. I think, you know, by making sure these inputs are included within the data, we will mirror something far more equitable. I think the second point is we know that there is inherent bias existing in the data, and we don't want to perpetuate that. And the challenge we face with AI is it scales fast. And so the bias that we may all face today, we want to course correct. And I think having more women at the table to intentionally, deliberately be building to challenge that and course correct, that's incredibly important. And then, of course, to mirror something far more equitable, because AI itself you know, won't be responsible. It's up to us to mirror and make it more responsible.
Great messages there. So Hilda, the women you work with may be cautious about AI for very practical reasons: misinformation, exploitation, tools that don't serve them. How do you honor that caution while still opening doors for opportunity?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that question. And thank you to the World Women Davos agenda for hosting us. Maybe before I jump into that question, it might be worth providing some context just on what WeBloom does. So WeBloom is an association based in Zurich, and we work to scale responsible leadership. And we work with large cap incumbent companies to help them, create products and services that are driving the thriving of communities and societies at scale. We do this in 3 different ways. So firstly, we convene leaders, again, as I said, of large cap companies. Secondly, we nurture next gen female tech leaders through our WAY Fellowship. And lastly, we work with filmmakers to make sure that these ideals are proliferated more broadly across society. So if I zoom into how we work with, next gen female tech leaders, which I think is really pertinent to your question, we've so far built a community of over 150 young female tech professionals who have come through our fellowship in the hopes of starting their tech careers at the graduate stage, which is where it's the most difficult. McKinsey has reported that there's about a 15% drop-off between, young female students who want to go into tech and those who actually land jobs, which of course we know if we don't have enough women at this stage in the pipeline, it has negative consequences down the line. So this is really where we want to work, bridging this gap with the WAVE Fellowship. And of course, we want to make sure we're making them competitive on the job market. And at the moment, it's all about AI. So our fellowship is also very much designed around that. And when we work with our fellows, with our young female leaders, indeed, we hear a lot of the skepticism because of the news, because of their own experiences. And for us, what's important is not to just kind of brush it away and say, no, AI is this huge opportunity, you should just grab it with both hands and it's going to, unlock all of these productivity gains and XYZ. I think it's important for us to first validate that their concerns are valid. And so we kind of start off by saying, yes, there are biases, there are risks of misinformation. So we kind of set the scene to say, you're not wrong, your intuition is going in the right direction. But at the same time, just as ZEHRA very, diligently said, it's a system that can also be changed, that's based on input. And so after setting the scene of acknowledgement of the risks, it's also important for us to impart to them the agency they have in not only using it, but also possibly changing it for the better, and not just being kind of bystanders to the trends and changes in AI, but really taking on the risks and challenges, being knowledgeable about them, and kind of using them, leveraging them to use AI more usefully. So this is how we kind of firstly make sure that we validate the risks because they are real, but at the same time, AI is here. I don't think it's going anywhere. And young women need to learn to use it and leverage it for their careers.
Yeah. Great points. So Ginny, let's switch to you. The tech industry often celebrates this move fast and break things approach to how technology is being built. Women's more cautious approach to AI adoption is being framed as falling behind sometimes. But in a world increasingly concerned about AI safety, isn't that caution exactly what leadership looks like?
Absolutely. First of all, everything you just said. And I mean it. Panels are boring when everyone agrees, so I'll find some tension in here somewhere. But I couldn't agree with that more. And so I'm at Microsoft, and my big boss Satya made some news here this week, saying something that to me sounded really obvious, which was essentially people won't use our tech, won't use AI if they don't trust it, don't trust us. And that if we really want to sort of win, I'm sure you've heard a lot of framing about this being a race or a battle or whatever you want to call it. If we want to win, then we need people to use our technology, and they're not going to use it if they don't trust it. And that could not be more true than for women, because women are naturally skeptical of something that they see could harm them or their families. And so I do think that that is leadership. Some examples, I speak to a lot of women, say in the journalism industry, who are very concerned about the way that AI is being used to depict women in public office or in political spaces, or who are publicly facing, such as themselves, and using it to remove their clothing, right? The deep fakes are something that people talk about a lot. A lot of politicians talk about it. They're very concerned that they are going to be deep faked and people will not believe them. Deep fakes of politicians is about this much of what we actually see out there in the real world as far as who's being deep faked. It is primarily women. It is primarily pornographic in nature and is almost entirely not consensual. And yet the conversation tends to revolve around a few male political leaders who are concerned that it's going to make them look like they said something that they didn't. Not to take away that concern, because that's an important part as well. But women are seeing how they are being treated in this environment, and they're not hearing those concerns echoed by their leaders and by others. And so I think those who are standing up, and in fact, I'll name someone who might be surprising to you, who's actually taken a stand on this issue, which is Melania Trump. And that's probably because she is one of the most depicted in this way, right? And she took a stand in the US and stood behind some legislation, some of the only legislation on AI that actually passed in the US, which was called the Take It Down Act. And it was essentially giving victims of deepfake pornography the ability to get it removed from other platforms by doing it easily. Gives them kind of some way to respond and react, because before there wasn't a lot that they could do. There's a lot more that can be done in this space, but it's an area that I do think we're starting to hear women on a leadership level stand up, and that is true leadership. And I don't think tech companies should be moving so fast that they don't stop and consider what it's going to take to earn the trust of half the world's population.
So do you think, just as a follow-up question, that women truly recognize their buying power, that they actually don't have to, be a victim in this case? What can women do, with respect to lobbying and helping to get behind those who are trying to make a difference in this space?
I would say, I think people underestimate the impact of civil society pressure on companies. I lead our human rights work at Microsoft. And so I spend a lot of time working with stakeholders in civil society who are concerned about either something we're doing or something that they don't have enough information about. And so they feel like we haven't been transparent enough, so they don't know what we're doing. And those conversations actually lead to changes. When we hear from stakeholders that they are concerned that we are not doing, something in particular, we will go back and we will take a look. And sometimes we'll have a new transparency report, or maybe we'll include new statistics. We'll engage closely with those groups. So creating sort of associations, getting together in groups and talking to the tech companies or whatever companies you're dealing with, that has real impact. The companies do listen because, again, it is in their best interest to. Yes, they want to build a better product, but they also have reputational and brand concerns. And so that kind of pressure does work. It does create a dialogue, and you do see change through it. It's not easy. The first meeting doesn't necessarily lead to a complete revamp of a product. So you need to have sort of appropriate expectations, but you will see iterative change over time. And I do think women are starting to gather in those ways.
So that grassroots effort, the connectiveness that we're so good at doing, is something we should be leaning into. So Ginny, my next question is actually for you, and it's building on what Hilda was saying. And this is really speaking to how we address legitimate barriers through informed interventions. So getting women comfortable with the technology, but also, how we can shift and move it in our way. So research shows that targeted interventions can triple women's AI adoption rates, but intervention can mean many things. What does an informed intervention actually look like? And, compared to well-intentioned programs that don't actually move the needle?
Right. I'll start by acknowledging there's a lot more work to be done here. As AI continues to change, I think the way that you teach people to use AI or to learn about it will also change. I'll say, though, that you'll find that Microsoft and a lot of the other tech companies are realizing, again, going to this idea of diffusion and winning their race, that it is important that people actually use the technology. And so through that incentive, you're seeing a lot of great curriculum coming out and some real trainings that are having impact. And they are targeting different communities. Because the reality is, you don't train someone in the Middle East on the use of AI in the same way that you would teach someone in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? So we are seeing that sort of differentiation in the way it's done. And the same thing goes for different groups. You'll show that women probably will learn differently. And we're starting to see this like one size fits all training and skilling programs are starting to become more specific and targeted to their communities. A great place to see that is on LinkedIn. There are all sorts of LinkedIn learning categories where based on your interests, you can learn how to use AI in a very specific way. So I think there's progress, but I also recognize that, you know, it's not perfect. One area where I'm seeing a need and that we're starting to see more of this in is with teachers. You know, we want teachers to teach children. That is their job. AI is making that very hard. A lot of teachers aren't sure what to do with it. They don't know if they should just not touch AI or if they should teach them how to use AI. There's worry about cheating. I'd say that's an area that we've really invested, is trying to work with teachers unions and teachers groups around the world to ensure that they have the skills they need because they're the ones that are teaching the children.
Very interesting. So Hilda, you're designing interventions for women who face compounding barriers. Those might be economic, geographic, cultural. What's the most underestimated barrier that funders and technologists keep overlooking? And if you had unlimited resources for one intervention, where would you put them and why?
Wow. Okay. So unlimited resources. I really like this question because I think when I look at the landscape generally, and also, you know, going back to my experience working both with incumbent leaders and next gen leaders, I think there are a couple of forces that are running here. I think on the one hand, I've seen directly how there is kind of a deprioritization when I think about, you know, the future of leadership, which is very close to my heart. There's a deprioritization of, firstly, you know, hiring young people because of AI. You know, AI is kind of, you know, removing the bottom, these entry-level jobs. So not just for, you know, female future tech leaders, but all young people in general. And of course, for young women in particular, that kind of compounds on them. And so for me, you know, having some conversations with, you know, potential partners that tell me, you know, what you're doing is great, but at the moment we just don't think we can put resources behind getting more juniors into the company. So that worries me, and I think that's underestimated within the conversation of the race and who gets there first and the geopolitics of it, is what happens to this generation of young leaders. Where do they go? And I've been following the conversations with DeepMind and Anthropic, and it seems like, oh, it's going to sort itself out. You know, people are going to adapt and find new trainings, but trainings take a long time, and we know there's a time poverty. So there's this one force that I think is underappreciated, just in terms of, you know, where are all these people going to go? I really feel for them. And then secondly, is when I look at the young people themselves, I think it's underestimated how much women and young women in particular already count themselves out before, you know, they've even tried to enter the job market or even used AI. They have this sort of psychological barrier in terms of the stories that they're telling themselves that are probably also shaped by the stories that they hear through the media. But this, I think, is such a potentially powerful lever for change for young women and women in general to take back agency. I really love the concept of agency, because I believe we all, you know, have the opportunity to be in the, not just the job market, but the market in general, and thrive. But you have to believe you can. And I think if you're already counting yourself out, it's kind of, down the line, defeating the whole purpose, and the outcomes from that point aren't great. So I'd say those are the two main forces. The leaders need to take more accountability of young people and young women, but young women too need to kind of, you know, start believing that they can have agency within these trends.
Yeah, and could not agree more. And the research certainly speaks to both those points. You know, the replacement of jobs is definitely a concern, especially the more entry-level jobs that are impacting the younger generation and how they build into leaders of the future is an incredibly big concern. And I know it's something that is showing up on the radar of why women are hesitating to actually adopt AI in the first place. And then the confidence gap. You know, what does how do we address that specifically? Zahra, there's a risk that addressing barriers becomes a euphemism for making women fit into systems that weren't built for them in the first place. And they weren't built by them either. How do we distinguish between interventions that empower women versus ones that just assimilate them?
Yeah, I mean, a very important question. And, you know, I really agree with this point around agency. I think this question here is a question where we really need to challenge, do women have agency within this space? Because this is not about shifting and morphing into a space where you can assimilate. We need to be able to have agency to be making these choices from the very start, being in the rooms at the beginning. But I think one of the things that's really important with this technology is users shape the output. Users shape what we see. It's a unique technology that is shaped by its user base. So actually, women have agency within this space by using the technology and therefore by pointing it in that direction. I think that's something that's really important to always have top of mind. I think the other thing to say is, you know, ultimately, women, I think, also need safe and brave spaces to experiment. You know, one of the big barriers we find when it comes to AI adoption is women associate it with cheating, and they see it as a shortcut and an unfair advantage. Now, that is a cultural, societal challenge and a really significant challenge that we need to fix because it's, you know, and so therefore role modeling that this is not cheating for a start, role modeling and spotlighting what you can do, I think is really key to this. So there are a couple of parts within it. One is actually to reinforce this agency point. We have agency because that's the way this technology does work. The second is we really need to get closer to resolving cultural and societal challenges. And I think those two things are really critical to start to create systems that work for women as opposed to systems that work against us.
Can I add something onto that? Just because I first heard someone talk about this tension between you're being told to use AI, but you're also being told it's cheating. I had not actually thought of it, and yet I realized I was feeling it in my work because we're being told at Microsoft you should be using AI for all these tasks, and yet every time I do it, I go and I remove those M dashes, right? Because I don't want anyone to look at that email and be like, oh, she clearly used AI. But on the other hand, I'm being told to use it.
Right.
And so I was like, what is that? Yes. Like, why do I not feel like I should be proud that I'm using M dashes? If you guys don't know, AI has a tendency to overuse M dashes, which I used to love, by the way, and it's kind of ruined
I love
it.
dashes, I know.
So unfair to the M dash. But anyways, I think that point is so interesting, and it's I never thought of it through the gender lens, but you're probably right. Women feel more like they should be,
It's been proving, so Harvard Business School did a huge study, over 100,000 data points within it, and they found that the number one barrier that prevents adoption for women is the association with cheating. And it is, and you can see it. I'm sure we've all experienced that. And so I do think this reframe around co-creation, this is not about us surrendering, you know, our agency to a machine. This is about co-creating with something that is, you know, this super technology that's adding IQ, you know, why wouldn't you co-create? And so I think that shift is really important around co-creation and surrendering agency.
Now, something I think we need to also be careful about is putting all women in one big bucket.
Yes.
And so when you look at other studies like Edelman's Trust Barometer for 2025, it actually saw that younger women do trust AI more. And it is as you get into older and older generations that's where that trust level really drops. But also there's trust issues with, you know, amongst men as well. So just having a bit of looking at all of these different data points carefully, I think, is incredibly important. So now I want to switch the conversation to thinking about, taking these concerns really, there's the concept of feminist leadership and thinking about, what it means to be a feminist leader, and also juxtapositioning that on top of how we position women as architects of ethical AI systems and letting us really own a new space potentially. So Zahra, I'm going to come back to you again. And, architect implies real power, not consultation, not feedback, but decision-making authority over what gets built and how. What structural changes are required for women to actually hold that kind of power in AI development?
So I think a couple of things here. I think the first thing is, Sarah, you mentioned feminist leadership, and it's something, I think about a lot in my role at UN Women. And interestingly, the values within feminist leadership are around collaboration, they're around accountability, openness, diverse perspectives. I think these are really missing from they can be missing within this story around AI, and there are gaps within that to solve for. I think the other thing to add is when we think about that cultural challenge, it's a non-tech challenge. And so I think, for women being architects of this technology, I also think that we need to have longer, wider tables of policymakers, of, experts around change management, ethical use of technology, multi-skills to really be part of this conversation. And I believe that that's really critical. I think that's really critical for your very important question, Sarah, on what feminist leadership represents and how we can make sure it's also more representative at this table.
Super interesting. Ginny, Microsoft has made public commitments to responsible AI. How do you ensure that ethics are integrated at every level of AI, and that ethical roles carry real authority rather than becoming a rubber stamp?
Sure. Well, I mean, I said this on a panel earlier, so if any of you heard me, sorry, but I am a person that traditionally hates process for process sake. And anytime there's a problem and someone on my team is like, let's build a process, I get frustrated because I'm like, if you build 4 more forms that people have to go fill out, are we like actually solving the problem, or are we just making people do busy work? And I say that because when it comes to the way that we've constructed our responsible AI, we've built a very thoughtful framework and process that actually helps our products build better and faster. And so I think a lot of the time we're having to ensure that the engineers and the business team recognize that it is an accelerant for them, that it is not a hindrance. I think we have a strong framework. We've been working in responsible AI for a very long time. I have colleagues who, had a title. One of my peers is the Chief Responsible AI Officer, and she's held that title for like 8 or 9 years. So well before we were really living in a time where people were thinking about responsible AI as a thing. So the foundation's been set. The way that products have to go through before they release, if they have an AI component, which these days almost all of them do, they have to go through a process within the company where they have to check off and make sure that they have followed these standards that have been set out by our team. And if they haven't followed the standards, or if they have a concern, it gets escalated to another team, right? I mean, you can imagine the way that the process is built. But while it's hard to say that you can ensure anything in this space, what we have ensured is that the business team knows what they're supposed to be doing. There are resources and teams available to help them if they're not sure how to do it. And in the end, we have a partnership with the business where they see, as we're working on it, they're seeing that we're accelerating it and making sure that when their product goes out into the world, they're not going to have to pull it back because of some disaster that happens around a responsible AI issue. And we really haven't yet had any of those really major challenges because they're going through our responsible AI process. So I would say ultimately the answer is boring. It is put the effort into understanding what responsible AI is, which we've made for a very long time, continue to iterate because everything's changing, and then build a strong framework for your business that they have to go through. So it's not a really sexy answer. It's not super fun. It's just very much like this is how you get things done and make sure that the teams are paying attention.
Well, but it is also ultimately how we make the product something that's more trustworthy, right? And I'm really curious. I mean, me, myself, I've been in technology space now for almost 30 years. We never talked about ethics in software development before. This is really the first time that I'm seeing it, and it's something that I'm now, as the leader of, technology at IMD, we're talking a lot about it, So have you had to do a lot of work with your technologists on learning what it means to be ethical in the technology space?
I mean, I'm not in there like giving ethics lectures, but when it comes to specific subject matters, sometimes we do carve out time to explain the why. A lot of times engineers just want the standard, just like tell me what I need to meet. But what we found is where there's the tension is when they don't understand the why behind it. Often if you just say it's legally required, they'll say, okay, like it's a law, I got it, compliance. But if it's not a law, there'll be a little bit of hesitation at times from someone on the team who will say, yes, but you don't understand how much I have to do. Like how I have 10 things that are above the line that have to be, they work on very tight schedules. We have to get this out in, a month or 2 months. Why should your thing, which is not a law, rise anywhere in the top when I have all this pressure on me? And so spending that time to explain the why and the impact. And what I have found is helpful is putting in business terms, which is often getting to, a competitive advantage. Well, our competitor is not doing this, and yet there's this whole group out there that is asking for it. So you're actually opening up a market, and it's a differentiator. That will work. That's not the ethics. That's getting to the competitive nature, but sometimes you appeal to that. And then often telling them, like, if you're talking about something around children's safety, for example, engineers are human beings. Like, they have children, they care. So just because they didn't take an ethics class in college doesn't mean they don't have an ethical core. So you explain to them, like, this is going to ensure that children, when they're on this platform, have a experience that is safe and secure. And you do not have to go much further than that, typically.
Fascinating. Hilda, the women you work with are often positioned as end users or beneficiaries of AI. What would it take to reposition them as designers and decision makers? And what examples can you give where you've got hope that this is possible?
I really appreciate that question, Sarah. And yeah, just building off of what Ginny and ZEHRA are saying, what it's going to take to get young women. So I'm really proudly sitting here representing the young women that we work with. They're going to need more trust. I think the industry is going to have to take a leap of faith and trust that, we need to make these early stage investments in order to see the sort of feminist leadership that we're talking about down the line. As things are changing, and moving very rapidly, that might not be the case if we continue in the way that we are. So on the one hand, of course, AI exposure and training is very, very important to kind of demystify AI as this kind of black box that needs special technical expertise. I think AI is actually an equalizer of opportunities in the right hands. And, really, positioning AI in this way and demystifying the story around AI is critical to doing that. But for us, something that we've also been exploring recently, given the trends in how entry-level jobs are changing, and coupled with the opportunity that AI could have in the right hands, that could also open a huge new pipeline of female entrepreneurs. If you're looking on the job market and you see actually, a lot of graduate roles, internships, entry-level roles are starting to dwindle, taking what's there, and taking an opportunity where in the past to build a product, you would need how many people in your team, and you would need all of this experience and technical expertise. And actually, as much as there are risks with AI, AI equalizes that and democratizes the opportunity for people to build. For young people who don't have the experience and expertise, relationships, network, they can use AI tools to create this kind of competitive advantage and bridge the gaps in their own knowledge. I mean, there are so many examples. With our WEI Fellowship in particular, you know, it's a week-long fellowship, and at the end of the fellowship, they present their ideas at the Google headquarters in Zurich, one of our partners, and you'd be amazed of the things that they've come up with in 1 week, which for us gives us a lot of hope, because firstly, it validates that there are these amazing young talents that are being left on the table by the market, firstly. And secondly, too, what they've been able to build with AI. I mean, one of the fellows built a tool for buying and selling secondhand luxury handbags. And she built it and is now launching it. And she did that in a matter of a week with the whole UI and UX done. So yeah, I would say that's what it's going to take, you know, a bit of demystification of what AI can be, and really kind of taking that opportunity to leverage it and not falling victim to the trends.
Yeah. I could see the implications for, you know, female entrepreneurs moving into the tech space, you know, this opening up, you know, like you said, democratizing access and not necessarily needing to be a coder anymore. You know, being able to really build that first minimally viable product is really phenomenal. So I want to move to another area, and we only have 10 minutes left, and this is more about thinking about the AI talent pipeline and how we support ensuring that, you know, the women are there at every stage, at every piece of, you know, how AI gets created and deployed and then used. And coming back to Ginny again, the pipeline problem is often framed as getting more girls into tech and STEM. I myself have been on this roundabout now for a long, long time. But women also drop out at mid-career and are underrepresented in senior technical leadership roles. Which stage of the pipeline is leaking the most from your standpoint? And what types of interventions or programs have you seen that really are making a difference?
I think that ultimately comes down to building a strong culture within a company. And a lot of the tech companies realized and are still realizing that there's a point where they start to lose a lot of their female talent. And it is around the time that they start having children. Not necessarily always the same, but that seems to be sort of consistent. And I think it's because it is hard to re-enter the workforce after having gone through a transition where you now have a child at home. And I think in the 80s and 90s, it was just not very easy to make that transition. And so a lot of women were choosing different things. What I have witnessed firsthand, and I know some of the other big companies have done the same, is they acknowledge that, saw that as a loss overall, because there has been, I mean, I think we were past the awakening point of the fact that we build better products when we have a diverse workforce, right? You can see times when products in the past have gone out that have clearly not had a woman involved because they wouldn't have gone out if they had. I won't like name examples, but we've all seen them. And so there's definitely already an awareness of that, but it's the culture within the companies. And just because some of the big companies do it doesn't mean people who work at smaller and mid-sized companies have that. In fact, I have an experience where when I first started having children, I worked at a very small company, and Europeans will be horrified by this. I had a 6-week maternity leave. And so for my first 2 kids, I was out for 6 weeks. I was back in the office, and I needed to, sorry, gentlemen, I needed to pump during the day, and they did not have a place for me to do it, but they said, you can just do it in your office. And I was like, well, there are no blinds in my office and there's a window. And they're like, fine, we'll install blinds. It all felt very much like I was putting them out. But I was like, I had a baby 6 weeks ago. Like, I'm still breastfeeding. And I remember going through this experience where I was like in my office, and one of the guys made a comment to me in the work room, or in the like coffee room, how uncomfortable it made him that he could hear my pump through the walls. And I was like, literally, what am I supposed to do? Like, go into the bathroom? We didn't even have outlets in there. So this is all, you know, off track, I suppose. But it shows that at the smaller company, there was not a culture. They were not thinking about that they might lose me, that I was talent, that they were turning away because I cared about feeding my child. Meanwhile, when I moved to Microsoft, where I had my 3rd child, it was a world of difference. There were facilities available to me. They had pumping rooms. They encouraged a much longer maternity leave. When I came back, there were networks for me to plug into. And I recognize that a large company has the resources to do that. I don't need a pumping room at my old company. I think I needed the culture that accepted the fact that this is the stage that I was in, and that they were going to be supportive of me and find ways to make it work. I would have been fine with different accommodations. I didn't need the fanciest. But what it ultimately came down to was that culture. And so where is it leaking the most? I don't have the data. I suspect it's always going to be at that stage where women are trying to make that transition. And I think the only way to really replicate or fix that is to build a strong culture that encourages women and provides all the support they need when they come back from that, and encourages them then to also, when they have small children, to be able to spend time with those children. That means a little bit of a change in their schedule and their time and some flexibility. When you build it in, though, you earn some loyalty and some trust, and that's how you maintain that talent.
I think anybody, because I have 4 kids, and I used to have to go into a shower stall that had a bench like this, and it just, that's what we had. That was the facility, and it was something that you were almost shameful about. So that's such an interesting, because I think often it gets framed that it's the technology itself that's driving women away, but the structural impediments and things, just that are kicking them out the door is something that also needs to be looked at. Zehra, you've navigated a career from big tech to global development. And I'm curious, number one, the support you received at critical moments in your own career, but also if you were designing a sponsorship or acceleration program for women in AI today, what would be the non-negotiables?
Great question. Big question. Okay, so the first part of the question, what was the most sort of the valuable, the space, the support? I think community, actually. I think community. I think this goes back to the point around culture, really. And I think in those big network environments, culture's really key, but community really makes that culture. Who you're plugged into, who you can go to for support, who's supporting you, who's taking cover. I think those are really important, and they can be replicated outside of big tech. They can be replicated outside of big organizations. But I feel community is really critical. I think what I perhaps missed, the second part of your question, is possibly courage. And I say that because I think at times, and this isn't down to a community at all, I think it goes back to the question around culture. I think at times where things are more challenging, where values are being challenged, I think we need to have this collective courage, really. And community works most powerfully when you have shared values and you're in it together. And so I think to your final part of the question around what do I think would make, really real success within this space for women, I actually think that combination of community and courage is really key. I think it's really key in the moment we're in right now. We've talked about it a lot within this panel, but, the gap to close for AI adoption for women isn't necessarily a tech gap. It's a culture gap, and I think that is really fueled by the need for community and courage working together.
Amazing. So, yes. So I'm going to ask a closing question of the panelists, maybe starting with you, Hilda. What's the one partnership or coalition that doesn't exist yet needs to in this space?
I think I'm going to, take the easy route and piggyback off of what ZEHRA and Ginny have said about culture, and particularly something that we're prioritizing at WeBloom is really around stories and narratives. I think that is what is upstream of all of these issues. What are we telling ourselves about where we belong, what we can do, and what is the world, what is the media, what are films and newspapers telling us about that? And I think this, again, another lever that can be really, really fruitful down the line if done right, if we really start to work closely to those who are owning the narrative, who are shaping the narrative, who proliferate it, at mass globally. And this is something that I think I started to really hone into after having kids, actually. I've got 2 daughters at home, and I've seen directly, they're still very young, 4 and 7, but I've seen directly how stories are really shaping what they think about themselves, what they think they can do in the world. And that just scales and scales and scales over time. And before you know it, they are teenagers or in their 20s. And the world has kind of convinced them of where they can and cannot go. So really, a coalition that I would love is a coalition amongst global development leaders, policy leaders, tech leaders, and the media, so that we can also make sure that the stories and the narratives that are proliferated at scale are also consistent with these ideals that we're striving for down the line in other industries. And maybe just to touch a bit on the technical part as well, I think another thing about AI is that, it's kind of, swallowing up coders and a lot of technical roles. So I think we are going to need more of these sorts of, soft skills, emotional intelligence, which for women, we tend to disproportionately be quite powerful in that area. So I'd love to also just end the panel to say that, that could be a reshaping of the narrative, that maybe the AI era is an era for women, because it means that our skills can be more valued in an era where, AI is going to take up all the technical stuff. We're going to need humans, to make decisions with emotional intelligence. And that's where women really thrive. So
Amen.
That's what I'd say.
I can't agree with you more. So I really want to thank these incredible experts for your time and your thoughts and insights, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sarah.